we were still doing a lot of work, community work. I started working in Harrow. Harrow Social Work Department had a community work unit then. It was attached to Social Work Department, specifically to work in Rayners Lane housing estate, working with the community there. We did a lot of work with women. So main thing was we invited Gurinder Chadha for International Women's Day. She showed her very first film. It was called We Are British But. It was a BFI grant that she had been given to make a film, documentary film on music. So she talked about how young people were getting involved in music. So we were working with, that Green Hill College just up at Harrow on the hill. So that's where we worked with the education department there, and we had a whole day meeting about women. And in the end, Gurinder came and she brought her film, and it was one of the first screenings of that particular film. And I still remember she came with her sister, and she talked about how important it was for women to tell their stories, and how she, with this film, was making a statement about young people who wanted to express themselves, because these songs were written by young Asians and put to music. They were basically Punjabi songs, very traditional in their language, but their music was very kind of Western and up to date, and that they had very much up with the music scene. So it was telling their story, and we were proud to have her there. So our work with women had gone on for a long time. The council wanted to work with people with mental carers of people with mental health difficulties. So they had some money, and because I was working for part of the council, they came and they said, we are looking to do this project. It's called Respite Services for people who are working with mental health, especially the carers.
I've always been, I guess, in my politics, a socialist and a feminist. And so I got involved in left-wing politics and also the women's liberation movement. To me, they were, juxtaposed, that one couldn't have one without the other, so just.
So what sort of things did you do? I know you huge voice when I first knew you in the national abortion campaign. That was how I got to know you, I think, on one of those local marches. What sort of, I can't find myself in the pictures you sent, but never mind.
Okay.
What sort of things did you start to get practically involved in around that time?
I think the trying to remember the dates, because Voice was in the late 80s, so that was come time later. The abortion campaigns, I think, started in the 70s, weren't they? 70. So I was involved in, because we had a local national abortion campaign group in Harrow. I was trying to remember the date. So very much involved in that, because I think when Duncan was 3, I got pregnant, I had an abortion. So that all triggered off, my trying to get it on the NHS, and I couldn't. So that sort of spurred me on to saying, well, women had a right to decide themselves, and also under the NHS, and not have to pay for it, because otherwise you have to pay for it. So, and then there was, I think we set up a socialist feminist group in Harrow, and then later on I was in the consciousness raising group with a group of friends. So that, and then going to women's liberation conferences in London and Edinburgh, and I think I got involved. I don't know all the dates. It's in a local nursery campaign as well. No. That's what I thought it's important to have, adequate nursery care. If women wanted to participate in more activities in society, and needed to share the childcare. I just remember probably standing in Harrow High Street, in various campaigns, and speaking out on a
National Women's Register celebrated its Diamond Jubilee in 2020. But in 1960, Guardian writer Betty German wrote an article for the Guardian's Mainly for Women page about the isolation of young mothers at home. The article was entitled "Squeezed Like Sardines in Suburbia." Then a letter from a young mother in Cheshire, Maureen Nichol, said, "Perhaps housebound wives with liberal interests and a desire to remain individuals could form a national register so they could find like-minded friends wherever they moved to." She got so many replies that she set up a network called the Liberal-Minded Housebound Housewives Register, which became shortened to the Housebound Housewives Register, and then became National Housewives Register, for which Maureen was awarded the OBE. And in 1987, members voted for it to become National Women's Register, or NWR. Well, how did it start, and what was the ethos?
Well, even in 1960 and early 1970s, the idea of housewives being in need of mental stimulation and with interest beyond coffee mornings or perhaps some voluntary work was received with more than mild surprise, and attempts to be a working wife and mother with aspirations to a career were very much frowned upon. So the register, as it became informally referred to, was a safety valve for mental frustrations and a shortcut to meeting kindred spirits.
Yes, there was a poster that stated, "Leave the sink, come and think," from the 1960s, and you have it.
I have it indeed, but I don't know if I can...
Very 1960s.
What Maureen most wanted was to meet like-minded women, friends, and her original idea of putting people in touch with each other for friendship and mutual help soon developed into group meetings in their own homes when there were several members in any one area.
So how was it run?
Groups began to form and were encouraged to make their own decisions about activities. As the number of inquiries grew dramatically, Maureen enlisted the help of enthusiastic members to answer letters and make introductions on a local or regional basis. Some areas produce local news sheets, and in July 1960, Maureen sent out the first typed national newsletter, giving news of group activities, spread of membership, profiles of members, and book lists. The first printed national newsletter appeared in 1965 to include informative or controversial articles by members and regular policy articles.
In my last year at university, a group of us had walked up from Devonshire Road. One house full of Brunel students lived in Devonshire Road, the other lived in Cornwall Road. And we walked up to the King's Head for a drink. And I walked up to the bar to order drinks for us all and was told they couldn't serve me because I was a woman. And I was really taken aback and couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. And so the friends who I was with equally couldn't believe it either, but that's how it was there. It was a 400-year-old tradition that bar only served men. And it started a campaign to try and oppose the license of the King's Head on the basis that they were refusing service in that bar to 50% of the population. And we had a petition which we collected around in stalls and around our local area to emphasize our campaign. We hired, can't remember how it happened, but I know that we managed to get a barrister to represent us when we went to the magistrate's court to oppose the license. And of course the brewery were represented by someone who's become a very senior judge now, so they were very well represented. And our plea to stop the license was turned down. But this campaign hit the national press. We called ourselves the Women of Harrow, although I would say at least 30, maybe more % were men as well. I remember we had a demonstration outside the King's Head, circling around the green there with banners. And on the day when we went to the to the licensing court, by that time it really had hit news at 10, and one of our number was interviewed for News at 10 in one of his very early news bits of reporting by Trevor MacDonald. I remember him coming up to us and interviewing us, and we featured in the Daily Mail, in the Evening News, by women who were really saying, why do women want to sit there in a bar listening to men using bad language and being uncouth? Well, that really wasn't the point. And we hit the local papers as well. There was lots of debate going on in the local letters page. We hit the front page of the local paper, so it really was quite a renowned thing, and quite a lot of sort of lies were told and distortions. I remember reading that the bar had been disrupted by 40 topless women's libbers wanting to go and disrupt the place, which was complete nonsense. None of us had done that. And it's interesting how these things get distorted in a sexist type of way. So yeah, although it wasn't the most successful campaign, but I think subsequent legislation about equality overrode it anyway. So there aren't really, in pubs, men-only bars anymore anyway.
The women in Harrow knew of women who needed help, and they had managed to get from the council a house which was quite local to here. That house was quite a big house, terrace house, and they would. The number was out, for people, so that social services knew about it, and they would get calls. Somebody had the phone and the phone number, and every week somebody would get a call from somebody who was in distress, and they would go and pick up the women and sometimes take them home if they couldn't get them into the refuge. And they would just take them to the refuge, and people were there with their children if they had them. And then they had... we all went round there, and people were there every day. There was a paid worker to look after the children, and then there was an outreach worker as well, who was part-time. And it was just basically women helping other women. Most of the women that were on the volunteer group were married women with their own homes, but knew what the difficulties were if you had a husband that you couldn't get on with, or had a problem like that. So they used to take them to the refuge and then keep in touch with them and help them to get the benefits if they needed benefits, and to get money and to get places. And we used to collect clothes, baby clothes. Alice Anson was fantastic. She would collect anything for anybody. She, prams, and we would get all sorts of things and collect pots and pans for them if they wanted to start up, when they got their own accommodation eventually, because we used to badger the council for them to get some accommodation. And it was very unofficial, but a very friendly and sort of loving setup, really, because everybody cared very much about these women. I was involved with the Women's Centre for the first almost 10 years, but I left in 1999 because my family circumstances changed. My mother died and my dad needed me. So I was, up until then, I was going in every week, most days. We were open from 10 till 3, and the 3 people that were there all the way through were Stephanie Baker, who got the premises in the first place, Jan Irwin, who was trained as a social worker, and she came into the management committee at the first meeting as a representative, I think, from the National Childbirth Trust, because we had lots of different groups involved with us, and so she was fundamental to keeping it going as well, because she kept going as well. So there was the 3 of us, Stephanie, Jan and me, that were there. One of us was there every day. Okay. Saturdays we had a rota for other people, but there were lots of people that came into the shop and then decided they would volunteer as well.
My thoughts are that the Women's Centre, I can really only speak to the time when I was there. I don't want to speak about it afterwards. I think it was a unique and amazing project. I think it is the best model of service for women I've ever seen. I think it was amazing. And, it was women, coming from all different professions. We weren't necessarily trained in what we were doing, because there wasn't training on what we were doing. I mean, literally, some of the domestic violence work we were doing, nobody could have trained us. We were learning on the job. I mean, we became the people that knew how to do it because we learned it. And it was really effective. We really did a very, very important work, I think. And I think that model still holds, that you have a general place in the community where you don't go there because it's a domestic violence service. You go there because it's a women's center. And when you're there, we were very determined we were going to have legal advice, counseling, and advice and information. Those were the 3 core services, which I still think are absolutely essential. And whatever else we bolted on, we ended up having complementary therapies. We had children's creches and activities, and we had stitch and sew projects. We had all sorts that got bolted on. But the 3 core services you need are legal, welfare rights, and counseling for women in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I still think they're the most important services. I would wish every community to have such a facility. And they don't. And sadly, we don't really have one because the Women's Center didn't survive in its form that we set it out. I'd say I'm still involved because I'm chair of the Harrow Domestic Violence Forum, Domestic and Sexual Violence Forum. I've been chair of that committee for 10 years. I did leave Harrow after I left the Women's Center, and I worked in Brent, and then I came back to Harrow. And when I came back, Councillor Margaret Devine got me back into this, and she asked me to be on the forum again, and I did come back on the forum. And she, at that point, was beginning to slow down some of her work, and she asked me to take on helping her, and I became co-chair, and then I became chair with her. So I have been a very, very active member of the women's sector in Harrow, pretty much my whole life, except for those 5 years when I was working in Brent, when I was on the Brent Domestic Violence Forum. So I didn't stop. I just became vice chair of that forum. So yes, I would say I'm still very much a part of that.
The only thing I would say is that it wasn't easy. I don't think it wasn't easy for me, and it was to do with expectations, both our own expectations of ourselves and each other, and more broadly, social expectations. And to be honest, I think if there had been more social support, then our own expectations would, I think it would have been easier if there had been more social support, both within our families and more broadly for men taking on that role. I think more men do it now, but it's still a minority, isn't it? It's still not something that many men do. It sort of raises issues about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman and a father and a mother.